Hello everyone, this is Field Master Victor Neustroyev, and today we are going to talk about Keres Attack. So mainly we will be focusing on how to play against Keres Attack with black pieces, because Keres Attack is a really sharp opening, and this is what you should remember, of course, when you play it as black. So if you are a Sicilian player, or if you play Keres Attack with white pieces against Sicilian, especially such lines like Scheveningen variation or some Niger formations, then you definitely need to know all the details, all the peculiarities, as well as typical tactical strikes. So I'm not saying that we are going to cover everything today, but for today I prepared three nice examples where black successfully refutes the Keres Attack and plays for a win, because well, Scheveningen or Najdorf are very flexible openings for black, and because of pieces activity, black is able to counterattack white, activating their pieces at the right moment. Okay, can you please let me know if the sound and video quality is good and we can continue? Okay, so everything works here. Let me refresh the page here. Mhm. Sound is little low. Okay. Okay, let me check how I can figure out it. I can increase the volume of my microphone. Is it better now? What do you think? Maybe this. What do you think? Okay. Here the sound is okay. Here the sound is fine too. Okay. Well, let me now. So not yet. Maybe you just increase the volume of your microphone, because I did my best. So gel has the sound cranked to the max. Interesting. Well, I'm sure my microphone is working really well. Okay. Oh, I put it as closer as possible. What else I can do? I can also increase this. What about now? Is it better? So, because I just increased it to the maximum. Well, maybe I can also check my settings. Okay, so the master volume is now 100%. Um, oh, sorry guys. Yeah, there was a mistake on my side. Now it should be a bit better. It was only 50%. Now it's an 80, so it should be perfect. Is it better now? Let me check actually my... Okay, yes, it's better. Maybe I should also downgrade it a little bit here. Yes, yes. So that should be perfect now. Yeah, thank you for letting me know it in advance before we started, because yes, somehow my microphone volumes was decreased to 50% only. Okay, so fine. Well, it's perfect that you all came today. So can you please share with me whether you are Sicilian players or not? Whether you play Sicilian with black or you play Sicilian with white? Because Keres Attack is only about Sicilian, of course. Well, Can Sicilian, I'm not sure if Keres Attack can be played against Can Sicilian, but it can be kind of a transposition from Can Sicilian positions to Scheveningen, where g4 is definitely a possibility. Okay. Okay, John plays Sicilian with white and black, and Todd doesn't play. Okay, so first let's discuss when Keres Attack is possible. The most common scenario is here. So knight f3 d6, d4, take, knight f6, knight c3 e6, and once e6 is played, so the bishop is blocked and the bishop no longer controls the g4 square, they may play g4. Well, I'm sure you guys understand the point of this move. So the key idea here is to play g5, chase the knight away, then grab more space and try to play 5, and finally g6, and weaken the king and take advantage of the white's superiority on the king side, more space, and potentially a weak king on e8. That's why black usually doesn't castle to the king side. They prefer to keep the king in the center. I myself play only Keres Attack only in few cases. For example, let's say a6, I play knight b3 with white, and if they play e6, this is where I play g4. So this is my scenario of Keres Attack against neither. Well, what else? Sometimes when players play so-called Godiva variation against me, so let's say here, take, I do this, knight b3, e6, e6, well, actually, knight f6 usually is first, but doesn't matter, it's just a different move order. Then e6, bishop goes there, queen goes there, then a3, a6, and f4. This is where I play g4 and get something similar to Keres Attack. But the difference is that with bishop a3, I gain a tempo because black has to move the queen twice. However, I also spend a tempo on knight b3, which sometimes is a helpful move, sometimes not. So I do not play Keres Attack directly, as it was in these games, for example, but I know a lot about such type of the positions. So, well, what should black do in this case? Black should may play knight c6 or may play h6. There are two most common moves. Sometimes instead of knight c6 they also play a6, and this is how the game transposes to neither variation. So these three moves. Well, h6 is the main one, and this is from where we start analyzing this position. So what white should do? Well, here white has two scenarios. They can play a passive move, well, a relatively passive move h3, but more common is h4 with the idea of doing g5 sooner or later. So, for example, h4 was played here. Black continued with a6. And rook g1 with the idea of g5, or just bishop g2 with g5, because the key idea is to play this move, vacate the h file, exchange the rooks, and somehow try to enter with the queen to h5 and maybe h8 and deliver some problems to the king on e8. Well, Of course, it's possible to play g5 right away, which happened in this game, but after that, the bishop has to take on g5. However, this line also deserves attention. So today I prepared three different games for you. In one of them, it was bishop g2 played. Yeah, so there is no one with rook g1. But let's talk about rook g1. So if instead of g5 in this position they play rook g1, what may happen? So what white definitely doesn't like about this move is that the rook is no longer on the h file. However, it does support g5, and g6 is coming in order to undermine the pawn on e6. Well, in such a case, knight f d7 can be played in advance, g5 anyway, h takes g5, h takes g5, because otherwise what's the point of rook g1? And with g6, black is able to stop this piece's activity. Anyway, this is what are likely to happen. Maybe f4, castle queenside, and sooner or later they will play f4. So this is quite an interesting position, but at the same time, looks like there is an open file on there is an h file open, and that means that the rook on h8 will be active comparing to the other lines where this rook and this bishop are stuck. Okay, let's go back and talk about g5 move which happened in the game. The bishop took, bishop e7, queen f3. Who can tell me what's the point of queen f3 move? Why not, let's say, queen d2? So who knows? Well, protect the h1 rook, which now is not as important because black is unlikely to take on g5. The idea is that the queen is more helpful on the f3 rather than on d2. So the queen potentially attacks a8, pressures f6, especially in case if g6 will be played at a certain moment of the game. Well, it does protect the rook, but this is not the most important thing. And of course, they are about to castle. So knight bd7 was played in the game, black castled. Queen c7. So the king is in the center, and because the g file and the h file are semi-open, the king is unlikely to castle to the king side. But which plan black should follow? So let's say rook g1. What do you think? What black should do in this position? Of course, in some variations of Keres Attack, white still castles to the king side, but it's more common when they castle to the queen side. So the key idea for black is to keep their king in the center for a while, because on the king side, the probability of a checkmate is much higher. That's why black keeps the king on e8, and while white is trying to expose the enemy king's position in the center, black is going to initiate the attack with on the queen side, because the king is here, with such moves like this: rook c8, knight goes to c4, through b6, or sometimes through, well, usually through e5, but sometimes through b6 as well, then b4 with some pressure here on c2. This is the key idea. So b5, a3 in order to stop it. So here you may ask me, what about this move? Well, this time it's not a good idea. Why? Well, bishop b7 is played with a temper, and after the queen moves, the pawn is lost. And if they take here, then the queen is taken first, and then this rook is under attack, while the pawn on c7 is a weakness. So a3, bishop b7, king b1, very common prophylaxis, and rook c8. What do you think? Well, the position is approximately equal. What do you think? Which plan white should follow here? Let's imagine you are playing it with white pieces. What should you do? So who can tell me? Well, for those of you who is not familiar about playing the position with opposite castling, who is not familiar of how to play opposite castling positions or how to play when the enemy king is on the other flank, I just want to remind that usually when the king is on the other flank, it makes sense to initiate the attack on this king and mainly with a pawn march, because by advancing these pawns, you do not expose your king, which is either on in the center or on the king side. So initiate the attack. So here your task is to succeed with the attack. White should do the same thing, but they are in a kind of complicated situation because the king is not on the king side. They would love to attack the king if it is on g8, but how to attack the king on e8? So there are suggestions of bishop h3 to target e6. Well, I think it's unlikely to happen. I can just play knight c5 or knight a5 in order to defend it. So I don't think that you may sacrifice the knight here. Well, but yes, we should definitely take a look at such moves like bishop h3. Well, let's say knight e5. The queen goes to maybe e2. And in this position, this move. And I don't believe in this sacrifice. So for example, what can I do? Well, I can take on a3 first. Well, no, it doesn't look... Well, maybe it does look good, because after this move, then here and this knight is hanging. Or I can just simply take, and after knight a6, yes, my queen is hanging as well as g7, but let's say I play queen e5. You take on g7, and I simply move my king away, maybe to d7. Yeah, maybe to d7, and I can successfully escape, I think. Or maybe not. Yeah, so it's a bit risky. So knight e5 is definitely a good move, but in this position it seems to me that knight c4 is too risky, so let's just play queen b6. And if now you decide to sacrifice, it doesn't make much sense. I can just take, and after knight e6, just b4, or maybe even this with knight e4 idea. So this is where taking on g7 doesn't provide white with any pieces. Okay, so bishop h3 is a nice idea, but sometimes may work, sometimes not. Everything has to be checked in such a position. So, well, the answer is that in such a position, the white's task is to open the king's position in the center. So the king is here, that's why the e file should be cleared. Sometimes it's possible with such moves like knight d5, it takes d5, it takes d5. That usually happens when the knight is on c6 and there is a pressure on the e file. Or f5, f4, and that would be the best option. For example, queen e3, g6, f4, maybe queen c5. The position is a bit complicated, and white is trying to play either f5, well, mainly f5, or sometimes e5. However, this time they played this prophylaxis in order to protect a3 as well as to attack the g7. But g6. Bishop retreats back. Now this knight cannot go to c5 because of this. However, it may go to e5 with a temper. What do you think? How black should how black should continue the attack? So black definitely should open the position of the king as well as to bring more pieces into the attack. Knight e5, queen e3, knight c4. Yeah, knight e5 definitely is a good idea, knight c4 also. Well, but let's first discuss this move, e5. So the knight is under attack. Let's say it goes there. And then you can, for example, continue with this move. So if knight takes, you have queen c2, king goes to a2. And then you can take on e4 with your bishop. So if they do this, you just capture the queen. So that can be a good move. e5. Such positions are usually full of tactics, and the key point is that this bishop is really good and attacks e4. So doesn't really matter where they go. Maybe they go to this square, it's still knight e4. So e5 would be a good move. As for d5 move, which has in mind the idea of joining the bishop to the attack, it also does make sense. So here maybe, well, yeah, bishop d5, queen goes to e3, then you take, pawn takes, maybe you can activate your rook through h4. That doesn't look so good, but also is a possibility. However, you should always remember that when you open the position in the center, your king may be vulnerable. Instead, in the game, it was queen b6. Not the worst move, but at the same time, not as good as e5. Knight b3, knight e5, queen e2, and this is where I want you to find the best move that black played, after which the game ended in a few moves. Who can find it? Okay, so I'm waiting for your suggestions, and while you're thinking, I want to show you, well, here, for example, f5 at some point to exploit this pin. Well, in which line it's possible? So let's say here, take. Well, here playing f5. Well, what's the point of playing f5 if we can just take the pawn on c2? Yeah, you'd better take on c2. Well, yeah, sometimes f5 is a possibility, but you should understand that pushing the f-pawn weakens the pawn on e6, and that can be decisive for the position. Okay, this is the position we have, and did you find anything? Knight c4 by Peter. Well, Peter, knight c4 is definitely a helpful move. If there was no better move, I would say probably, but you can play better instead. So imagine that you are a grandmaster. Well, Bruton Batista, who was playing with black pieces, was 2644, but let's say you are at least 2500. Which move would you play? This is a very logical idea that usually happens in Dragon, but also works in any positions with the C file being open and the king's castle to the opposite flanks. Okay, the move I'm talking about is just rook takes c3. Why this move? Because after this knight is destroyed, the pawn structure is ruined, and the central pawn also is lost. So let's say they take, bishop takes, and then they take with the pawn. Looks like we sacrificed the exchange, but we didn't perform the main idea. But we can capture on h4, then e4 is vulnerable. Knight c4 is coming after this. These two pawns are vulnerable. So they definitely lose more pawns, and we not only activate all of our pieces, but at least get more material to compensate it. So in the game it was b takes c3 and knight e4, threatening with a fork. How to play? Well, King b2, this is the move that was played in the game, and after knight c4 they just simply resign because the king goes there, then knight goes here, it's a fork. We can gain the exchange back, we can also grab more pawns, for example the one on a3. If let's say after this move it's bishop d2, then well, it's enough just to capture the material. This pawn dies anyway. Queen f2, knight f2, the rook moves, and we can capture on h4 with the rook or with the bishop, doesn't matter. Or maybe if this move we can fork again. So we have so many opportunities, and with so many extra pawns, black is completely losing. That's why white resigned here. So what I want you to remember from this game. So first of all, it's much more dangerous if they take on g5 with the pawn, not with the bishop. But if they take with the bishop, then two files are semi-open, and you'd better keep the king in the center and instead initiate your own attack on the queen side. Rook c8 is a very helpful move because now you can find some tactical ideas with queen takes c2 once you get rid of these two knights. And because of your bishop and your knight position, e4 is vulnerable and they should take care about this pawn. Another idea is to bring the knight to c4. Doesn't matter which way, but then this knight can be sacrificed on a3 or b2, and that would weaken the position of the knight c3. However, if white loses a few tempi, then knight c3 may be decisive. So because of the pawn structure and the loss of this pawn, after which all your minor pieces are well coordinated. Okay, fine, so we are done, and let's go further with our next game example. So here the same. Oh, it was slightly different move order. Knight f6 was played. Well, you know this. There are no this move because of a check. So knight c3 d6. It's pure Scheveningen, and then g4. h6 anyway. Well, h4 is the main line. This time it was bishop g2. Bishop g2, knight goes to c6. So it's fine. There is no such move like e5 because the knight goes to d5. E takes d6, bishop d6, and this position of the knight is really good. For example, here black can continue with bishop a6, preventing white from castling. So it's approximately equal. So that's why they do not play it. Instead, it was h3, having in mind that this pawn may be hanging in some variations. Well, it doesn't mean that white no longer wants to succeed with the attack. They will play f4 and they will play f5 or g5. You'll see. So bishop d7, bishop e3. Now I have a question for Sicilian players. Which move would you play in this position? So there are three logical moves, and you may mention all of them, but I want you to play something really specific. Okay, Brian suggests a6, and well, no, Brian, yes, this move is quite common, and it's actually the most popular move in this position, not the strongest one. Okay, so Peter, looks like Peter understands Sicilian better. It's knight e5. So a6 is also possible, but knight e5. So because the bishop is already here, knight c4 becomes more dangerous. If black exchanges the knight for the bishop on e3, they are really good. So queen e2, rook c8, We do not need queen c7. We'd better activate the rook. And doing this stuff was better. And bishop c1, and then they soon can play this move. For example, the game could continue with, let's say, queen b6. Well, black is still better, slightly better, because it's hard for white to develop pieces. And now with the king there, h3 and g4 moves are questionable. Castle queenside. Interesting and definitely a very logical move. However, here it's already inaccuracy because black didn't lose any tempi and they have their knight already on c4. Again, knight b3, then take, and well, maybe you don't need to take right now. Maybe you first play a6 and then b5, or maybe b5 right away. Okay, king b1. Now the king is already on b1. So all the moves black played were logical. Their pieces are quite flexible. What do you think? Can black exploit the enemy king's position? Because well, and this bishop is not doing much, right? It does defend the pawn only. h3, g4 right now are not helpful moves. They might be helpful in case if the king is on g8, together with f4, g4, and so on, or f4 and g5. But right now, these moves are kind of tempo losses. Queen e2 also is not a helpful move because it didn't stop knight c4, because rook c8 is a part of the plan. The rook is on the c file, attacking c2. So how would you play in this position to get all of your pieces coordinated? Okay, Brian suggests knight a3 to sacrifice. Well, it's definitely an interesting option, and but they may not take. They may play king a1, let's say. What else? d5 by Todd, knight a5. Well, John, I think you need to explain knight a5 move because I don't understand it. Well, the c4 is a really good position for the knight. What's the purpose of doing this? Well, d5, when your king is too open, so what if they take just? They can take with the knight and with the bishop. d5 only helps white to improve their pieces. e5 first, then knight a3. Well, let's check it out. So e5 first, the knight goes there, let's say. Then knight a3. Well, maybe king a1 then just. So the pawn is still protected. And you weaken the d5 square, so they may occupy it sooner or later. Well, yeah, knight e3 is definitely a good idea, but the move that was played in the game is much, much better. It's queen b6. Yes, that's right. It's queen b6. Threatening the mate. How to play? Well, the most logical response can be knight b3, after which we take, double their pawns, get a bishop pair, and this is where I'm sure you understand that black is better. So this bishop is not doing anything. Bishop e7, bishop c6, knight d7, knight e5. Well, I would say black is strategically winning. The only task is to secure this bishop's position and to not let them to exchange their knights for our bishops. Bishop c1, another logical option, may also work. But after knight a3, king e1, what is the problem? So Brian suggests knight a3 earlier, and I told that the king can go on a 2a1, and there is no continuation then. But in this position, with the queen on b6 already, there is a continuation of this attack. So who can tell me? Yes, John, it's rook c3. Rook c3. So rook c3, if they take, it's a mate on b1. If they take our knight, then at least we can do this move and pressure here. So let's say this. Then we do not need to move the rook, just e5, because if they take, it's a check, and then we capture the second piece for a rook. And if the knight just moves, then just rook c2 with a winning position. So Well, knight b3 was the best scenario, but even there, black is perfect. However, it was knight db5 played. And the queen is under attack. So, well, taking on a3 is possible, but this knight is a bit active. We don't want to lose a pawn. That's why queen a5. So the queen is still into the attack. And this knight is hanging. There is no possibility of taking none of these two pawns. For example, knight a7. How would you play? Well, I think it's just too easy for you. Rook a8 and the knight is trapped. Oops, rook a8, I blunder here, sorry. Okay, then let me take on e3. Yeah, let me take on e3, and now if queen takes, then I can play rook a8 move. And the knight is trapped. If they take here first, then I take there, and this knight is trapped, after which I'm threatening to take here. So, for example, rook d1, bishop c8. And black has extra piece for a pawn. So this knight goes back to d4. But the game is already lost. How to continue in this position? Who can tell me? So guys, what are your suggestions? If you have any questions, just you may ask. Okay, so Peter, I think, is correct. Peter suggests knight b2. This is the move that was played in the game. Knight e3 looks attractive, but again, how to continue after king a1? Our queen is no longer on b1 and there is on b6, and there is no mating threat. Moreover, there is a rook defending this square. So knight takes b2. The knight is under attack, the king is exposed. So king takes, queen c3, king goes to b1, which is the only logical square. Well, they could also play to c1. It was much better to bring the bishop to the game. But in the game it was played queen b4. Or maybe queen b4 was also fine. Okay, queen b4. So if, for example, knight b3, this position after knight e4 is completely winning. There is no discovered attack, and knight c3 is coming, so they would have to take. And, well, how many pawns are we up? 2 pawns, which is enough for a grandmaster, even for a candidate master, to win in this position. Instead, king a1. d5 now. E takes d5. Queen takes c3. King goes to b1. And after bishop a3, white simply resigned. Why did they resign? Well, they have this move, right? They have bishop c1. That was the only way to defend b2. How would black continue after bishop c1? What do you think? Oops. Sorry about that. I have Jack Russell, so sometimes he wants to guard our house. Okay, so here we have 2 suggestions. Bishop takes c1 and rook c4, queen c4. No, queen c4 doesn't make sense. We do not want to exchange the queens here. Rook c4 maybe, but the problem is that once we do this, they always have knight b3. Yes, it's bishop c1. What's the point? If the rook takes, it's just queen takes d4 and black has extra piece. If the king takes, it's a check and it's still an extra piece. So when you have the attack, you shouldn't obligatory checkmate. You can convert this advantage into something else. For example, you, let's say, gain material advantage, and then in the end game you slowly realize it. Maybe you ruin the enemy pawn structure, and in the game you realize it. Maybe you get another form of your pieces of your advantage, like it can be, I don't know, 2 bishops, but usually it's extra material or a better pawn structure and some weaknesses into the enemy camp. However, sometimes it's also a checkmate. Okay, fine. So we are done with this game analysis, and this game illustrated us that this bishop g2 weakens the c4 square. This is what black can take advantage of, especially if the king castles to the queen side. However, even if the king goes to the king side, knight c4 is still a good move. And because of that, you can initiate the attack. So when you play against Keres attack, your main task is to focus on a counterplay. If the king is on the, if the enemy king is on the queen side, then it's definitely a counter attack, a so-called queenside attack, and the pawn march trying to expose the king. What if the king is castled to the king side? This will be illustrated in our next example. So this time Keres attack was played in one of the Najdorf variations. So a6, it's a pure Najdorf. Bishop e3, the main move here is e5, but Grandmaster Situraman played e6 and got this attack. So I know this position a lot. So for example, I am attending classes with Grandmaster Robert Hangaski here in Buenos Aires, and we were talking about this position, we were analyzing it. So here e5 deserves attention. This is probably the best option for black. Then what, knight goes to f5, g6, and if g5 is played, g takes f5, e takes f5, and black gets an extra piece. But where does this knight go to? If the knight goes to g8, then queen f3. Black totally controls everything in this game. For example, knight e7, knight e4. So there is no move knight d7 here. And if the knight comes here, then it's castle queenside and it's vulnerable. If the knight comes here, then it's knight f6 and the king is exposed. So there, well, at the cost of a piece, white has a really strong attack and black can hardly solve their problems. If, let's say, black keeps their knight on f6 hanging but continues with d5, that makes sense, because after g takes f6 is just d4 and another fork on these 2 pieces. Let's say queen f3, d4 castle queenside, there is a pin, knight bd7, and this position is approximately equal. Yes, well, it's playable for both. Both players can play for a win, but it's likely to end, well, it's likely to be equal, so everyone can win. So bishop c4, for example, or bishop takes d4, it takes d4, rook d4, let's say. There are a lot of options white can initiate, and black has to find the most accurate moves. But e5 is definitely the best continuation here. h6 was played by black, and then the game transposed to Keres attack. Knight c6, h3, bishop e7, and f4. So it looks like white plays logically. Knight goes to d7 in advance. So it's important to move the knight in advance, because we definitely don't want to achieve something like g5, h takes, f takes, and then g6, weakening the pawn on e6. So that's why it makes sense for us to get prepared for it, because I did it many times with white pieces in similar positions. Castle, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and well, black should develop the queen side. They should play b5, bishop g7, b7, and so on. So, but if they play this move, then e5 is coming. And after d5, this bishop will be quite blocked. Well, let's say knight e2, knight goes to d4, then somehow f5, and white definitely has more prospects. When black plays Sicilian defense, they do not want to play this pawn structure. They want to try to play something with the pawn on d6, or sometimes with this pawn on e5. Well, queen g7 here is not an issue. So rook b8 was played in order to play b5. But queen g7 is not an issue. The queen is trapped there simply. a4, b6, rook a d1, queen c7 is a prophylaxis. Queen goes to d2, bishop to b7. Queen f2, some pressure here. The queen can also be active on that flank. White decided that black decided that they should castle, which was a clever idea. Why they should castle here? Well, what else to play first of all? And of course, black understands that white is about to initiate some pawn march and try to expose the king, which is a really good strategy, and very often white is able to succeed with it. But let's take a look at this position and try to look for a counterplay for black. So this time the king is castled here, which is a slightly different attack, slightly different type of the position, but we still have the pawns attacking us. And I don't think that we can somehow take advantage of the enemy king being exposed, because it's not, and it has all the pieces surrounded it, and so I just don't see how black can initiate any attack here. But the black's position is not worse because of their pieces flexibility. This setup, which is very common and well known as the hedgehog setup, so these pawns are like the spikes of the hedgehog, which do not allow enemy pieces to enter our territory. These pieces are quite flexible. The knight can jump to c5, sometimes to e5. The bishop is attacking e4. So what should we do in this position? Let's think. Of what black should do, which counterplay they should find. Okay, there is a good point from Peter. Peter says, okay, how can black okay, so, I think Peter has in mind that white gets a lot of space and 4 pawns on the 4th rank already, and doesn't it mean that their position is better? Well, yes, getting to 4 pawns on the 4th rank is definitely dangerous for the black king and for the black's position in general, but here black compensates it with their pieces activity. Yes, and with pieces activity and pieces flexibility. Oh, so John suggests g5. Well, I think g5 loses the game, actually. Let's check g5. H takes g5, h takes g5, then what? I want to deliver a checkmate. Okay, let me take. Then you play knight e5. Oh, it's so risky. Okay, well, maybe not. What else I can do? So if I do f5, well, yeah, what if I do f5? You can play this move. Then I want to play f6, but then it's knight g4. I think I'm fine with it. So f6, if you take, I play queen g3, your knight is hanging, you may take here, but then it's a mate. Or you may take on f6, but it's also a blunder. Take, king moves, rook takes f6. You have to take, otherwise it's rook h6 mate. Then king goes, doesn't matter where. If it goes to h7, I play king f2 and rook h1 on the next move. If the king goes to g8, then I just have this. So, well, yeah. So it doesn't look good. g5 is too risky. Okay, what else to check? Knight c5 looks reasonable. Well, yes, knight c5 looks reasonable, but how do you benefit of this move? Let's say they play g5. What is your next step? Let me check what else do you have in mind. Yeah, so Darius also suggests knight c5. Okay. Well, no, that doesn't work. So knight c5, then they play g5, and I don't know how to continue. Well, maybe e5 deserves attention, but this is how you enter. Well, this is how you have to stay under the attack and in the passive defense. So, for example, if you play f6, they play g5 definitely, or maybe they first play queen d2 and g5 after that. That would be better. So, and what I want you to remember that in this position, you are no longer flexible. The pawn structure is already defined. And the white plans is clear. They play g5, then they get their major pieces through the h file and try to checkmate. What black should do in such a case? Ideally d5, but d5 is impossible in this position. It's a pawn blunder, even if knight comes to b6. Okay, so h4, and here this is the key. So this pawn is the object of the attack. Knight f6? No, bishop f6 to liquidate this knight. Well, how can they play? They play g5 in the game, but let's decide if, for example, they try to defend it, I don't know, with queen d2 move. Would it help? I don't think so. Then it's still bishop c3, queen takes, the queens are exchanged, and this endgame, even if the pawn on d6 is lost, and it is lost, well, maybe not. We can do this move. So g4 is vulnerable, e4 is vulnerable, and c3 is vulnerable too. So let's say rook d6, knight takes e4, this is hanging. So probably bishop takes, this is hanging. And this is what we're gonna play. So let's say rook f2, this move, bishop d4, b5. Well, this position is approximately equal. It's likely to end up as a draw. Well, even if you do this and I continue with that, take rook b1, king goes here. Just this move, the pawn is lost. Well, even if you do this and then you decide to take, it's still fine for me. Without a pawn, but with enough pieces activity, it's still a draw. Or here I can just continue with rook c2 move. And after rook takes, bishop takes, this rook is hanging as well as the bishop. So this move, then this move, the rook moves again, take, and this is a draw. So even this queen in game is even this in game is unfavorable for white. So how to play? Well, g5, right? But then bishop takes, pawn takes, and queen may take on c3. But then d6 is hanging. So first of all, black needs to find a good move because their king side can be exposed too. What do you think black should play here? Well, this is the question personally for Brian. I just want to understand whether you remember what we were talking about, opposite side castling positions and pawn marches against the king. But guys, you can also answer this question whether you should do anything or with the king side, or you should do this move, or you should activate the knight. Well, let's decide. So waiting for your suggestions. Well, yes, this is the same side castling position, but the idea is pretty much the same. Black should do not allow white to achieve something. f5 looks interesting. Well, yeah, f5 does look interesting, but they take on h6 and the g file is exposed. What else can you suggest? Yes, it's h5 in order to keep the king side closed. Even if you lose this pawn on h5, your king is still relatively safe. Well, because if you open the files, they can attack your king directly through the files with their rooks and queen. Well, they continue. Well, they probably need to play queen d2, defend here and consolidate, but they played f5, having in mind that they may get a dangerous attack. Knight goes to c5. Well, f takes e6, f takes e6, and then queen e2 would be better. Even after this move, knight takes e4, bishop d4, e5. They are still fine. This pawn may be lost, so there is no material loss for white, or they can capture on e4, say bishop e4, queen e4, take, take. Then what? Then white looks okay here, but I think it's still equal. They are unlikely to succeed with the attack, having just few pieces on the board. Black position doesn't contain any weaknesses. c2 is a weakness. Well, it's likely to be approximately equal position. But they play queen e2. They want to keep the position closed with no counterplay for black, and they still want to do this stuff. But it's too late. Knight takes e4. Now if queen h5, it's just a fork on g3 and the queen has to retreat back. If bishop f4, bishop takes e4 and then queen h5, then it's just bishop f5 and g6 is still not a good idea because of bishop g6 or f takes g6. That's why f takes e5, e6, f takes e6, bishop f4. This is a double attack as well as a discovered attack. But queen c5, this king is exposed too, and this is one of the main disadvantages of having the king on the king side. At a certain moment of the game, it may get exposed because we have the bishop here, sometimes we have the bishop or the queen on c5 too. King h2. Now this is hanging. This is hanging too, so bishop d5 defending here. If c4, it's bishop c4, so it doesn't work. If, well, they played queen h5. Bishop goes to c4 anyway. And in case of bishop d6, how would you continue here? Because we don't want to sacrifice the exchange. What should we do instead? So who can tell me? Rook f2, right. A rook check, because if they take it, it's over. King goes to h3, then bishop e2, and that's it. So bishop e2, the queen goes to g6, which is the only square. Then what? Let's decide. Well, queen e3 check, and let's take the rook, for example. Maybe queen f3 also makes sense, but I think it's enough just to play this move. So if they do not take our rook, then if this move, I think it's bishop d4. Oh, no, it's queen c6, queen g2. If this move, it's just queen e3 and it's over. So the bishop has to retreat, after which it's okay just to take the rook. Well, maybe with the bishop. Maybe with the bishop is better because it forces another rook sacrifice. Well, I can show you if you want. This, take. The king has only this square, but then it's bishop e2. So rook takes, this bishop is pinned. Looks really nice. And g6 doesn't make sense. At least you have queen to h6, but I think you can play better in this position. Yes, you can play this move. If they do this, you have queen e2. If they play this move, then you have this, and then you take on g3, and then that leads to a checkmate. Okay, fine. So queen g4, potentially attacking e6. Bishop f1, queen e6 check, king goes there, and this is how they lost the exchange. So was there a way to save this exchange? This is the question. Well, let's see. For example, if they play this move, it's bishop e2 anyway. If they play somewhere else, we take on f4. So they had to sacrifice the exchange. And later in the game, black managed to realize this extra exchange. So here, no queen d6 because the bishop is pinned. So it's queen takes and the bishop cannot take. Queen g4, queen f5. The simplest way is to exchange the queens, but white wants to get some practical chances. Queen h5, then this move. Rook f2, queen c5 back. It's important to keep the queen on the 5th rank because it stops g6 while the pawn is pinned. So rook g2. Now if this move, it's just queen e8, so the bishop is not hanging, but something like rook e4 was enough. The position was winning. Well, in the game it was rook e6, and they played for how many? For 30 moves more, but we are not going to analyze it. Because, well, I'm sure you understand black is completely winning in this position and the rest is just a pure technique. What I want you to remember, well, from this webinar and from this game, when your opponent in Keres Attack castles to the queenside, your main plan should be to initiate the attack on that flank and try to keep your king in the center for a while, but to focus on how to expose your king. At the same time, you should keep your pieces flexible. You should also keep pieces flexible even if he castles kingside, because he's definitely about to initiate a kingside pawn march anyway. There is no better plan for white in such positions. And if you are a Sicilian player, then you probably are familiar with this plan. But then you should compensate it with your pieces activity. Because while the pieces are flexible, you can do anything you want. And why I play Sicilian, it's because there is always a way to coordinate my pieces properly, depending on how white sets their pieces. And I can always prevent their plan. So here, for example, 4 pawns on the 4th rank, it's really risky, but bishop f6, and we have a counterplay. And if they, let's say, try to do something like that, then in this position, just e5. If they take, we take with the knight. If they retreat, we take there and still do the same thing, or maybe just knight e5 here, which also looks good. So bishop takes. Knight e5 is okay, bishop e5 is better, and if they take, we take with the knight. While the position gets more open, the chances for white to succeed with the attack are lower. But you shouldn't forget that even if they play g5, you shouldn't open the position. So keep it, you shouldn't open your king side. Keep the pawn structure blocked and closed. Okay, that's it for today. Do you have any questions for me? Also, we have to discuss what we're gonna study at our next lesson, at our next webinar. I can make a webinar devoted to how to save losing positions. What do you think about it? You can suggest your topics. Well, I know that John asked me about Rui Lopez and tactics in Rui Lopez. Well, I can do the webinar about how to play the exchange variation of French defense with black pieces, because it's a very drawing variation, and well, you definitely need to learn how to play for a win with black, because, well, even with black pieces, you should play for a win at this level. If you are, let's say, 25, 2400, 25, then with black pieces against a strong player, you can draw the game. It's okay. Because playing for a win may contain a lot of risk. So what else do we have? That was Keres. We also play like Alireza Firuja. Yes, and Karakan for black. So these 4 different topics that we can choose of. Okay, fine, guys. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. And so if you are looking for coaching, you can go to our website, chesslance.com, and schedule your free chess lesson with one of our coaches. Here you click, then you choose your coach. For example, it can be FIDE Master Armin Mushevich. Choose the time that works for you. You can also choose your time zone. So let's say mine is, where is it? Buenos Aires, Argentina, Buenos Aires. So then you choose what works for you, enter your name, and you click proceed to the payment. We do not charge any money for trial classes, but we freeze $2. So you see, we may hold $2 on your card, but you will get this money released in just a few days, even before the session. But definitely you will release it after the end of the session. It depends on your bank. And we do hold these $2 because people who enter their credit card details are more serious about the lessons and they are unlikely to miss them. If you're looking for a 1-hour class, then you can click here, book your lesson, choose your coach, and this is where you have to pay. Okay, fine. So let me check if there are any other questions, and if not, okay, maybe a white strategy against Caro-Kann can be a good topic. Yes, I agree with you. What else? Saving losing positions and Caro-Kann. Okay, fine. So no more questions. That's why. Thank you guys for coming. Let's finish for today and see you next.